Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bruce Williams. I am the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. We are here today to talk about who will be residing in that building or one close to it after the election next Monday. Today, we are doing a candidates panel for the riding of Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke. We have representatives here from the four parties who currently have representation in the House of Commons. I would like to begin, of course, by recognizing that we live and work in the ancestral territories of the Lekwungen-speaking Coast Salish nations of the Songhees and the Esquimalt. We're pleased and proud to be working alongside them every day. Also want to make a recognition of those celebrating the high holy days of Rosh Hashanah right now. We send along our greetings to all of you. So the panel today will happen in this form. We are going to go each candidate with an opening remark, and then we'll get into a series of questions. And they'll have about a minute and a half to reply to those. We're going to get through a fair amount of content here today. We're not going to be doing anything in the way of rebuttals or anything. We just want to make sure that you get all the facts and all of the details and data you need from these candidates in order to make the most informed decision that you possibly can for the election on Monday. Or if you've already cast your advance ballot, this may confirm what you've already chosen to do. So I'm going to introduce today's panel featuring the candidates, as I said, representing parties with a seat currently in the House of Commons. Randall Garrison is the candidate for the Federal New Democratic Party. Harley Gordon is the candidate for the Green Party of Canada. Doug Kobayashi is the candidate for the Liberal Party of Canada. And Laura Frost is the candidate for the Conservative Party in Canada. To get us underway, I will call on Randall Garrison to make opening remarks of 2 minutes. Mr. Garrison, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Bruce. You know, we've come through a lot together since the last election. The pandemic has hit us hard with loss of loved ones and health and financial hardships. The discovery of thousands of unmarked graves at residential schools will hopefully force us to stop looking away and act on the urgent need for reconciliation. And this summer of extreme heat and wildfires has presented us with undeniable evidence that we must treat the climate crisis as an emergency, or we will literally face trying to live on a planet on fire. All of these hit us hard, but undeniably, some harder than others. New Democrats fought for you in this minority parliament. We fought for a universal CERB to replace lost income, a 75% wage subsidy to save jobs, and 10 days paid sick leave so Canadians could stay home when they were ill rather than risk spreading COVID. In this campaign, Jagmeet has put forward clear proposals on how to make Canada more fair and more resilient, like bringing dental care, prescription drugs, and mental health programs into our public health system, and a federal income supplement to lift all seniors and people with disabilities out of poverty. MPs managed to work effectively across party lines to respond quickly to the pandemic, and now we need to do the same to confront the climate crisis. New Democrats believe we need to start with an immediate end to fossil fuel subsidies and instead invest those funds in renewable energy projects that will help us reach net zero by 2050, and at the same time create good family-supporting jobs in every community. But in order to succeed, we need to draw on the talents of all Canadians, and that requires a more equal and inclusive Canada. We would already have the resources needed to move forward if everyone paid their fair share. That's why we're calling for a wealth tax, making web giants actually pay taxes in Canada, and putting an end to tax avoidance by the wealthy. I believe the pandemic has taught us that when we pull together, we have what it takes to meet the tough challenges ahead. Thanks to the Chamber for giving us the chance to talk about the way forward here today.
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. Next up, Harley Gordon, the Green Party. Harley, you have 2 minutes. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this listening session. It's wonderful that we can come together before the election and really chat and address our policies. So, my name is Harley Gordon, and I'm running for the Green Party of Canada. I am a forest biologist. I'm a scientist. I'm a writer. I'm an environmentalist. I wear many hats, and I'm running not because I think the system has worked out in the past. I'm running because there is a lack of representation in our riding, and there's a lack of progress with a lot of the concerns and issues that we face. We still face issues of affordability. We face issues of housing. We face issues of the climate crisis, and we are failing to meet the needs, the time to meet the requirements for the time it's now. I'm running because our parliament lacks younger voices. Our parliament lacks a vision for a long-term future in Canada. I'm running because I see representatives talking about the next 4 years, the next 5 years, when we need to start considering the next 50. This is one of the things that I offer as your representative in Esquimalt-Sooke, is a long-term vision for the future and putting forth bold progressive policies that are going to work towards the betterment of our riding and our nation. I believe in a strong private sector leading the way when it comes to the climate crisis and working alongside clear federal government regulations and mandates. I believe in working together and supporting local governments like municipalities, First Nations, and provincial governments when it comes to addressing the issues that we face. So I'm offering to, I offer not a top-down approach, but a locally led initiative, locally led solutions to national problems. Thank you.
Harley Gordon, Green Party of Canada, thank you very much. Up next, Doug Kobayashi is the candidate for the Liberal Party of Canada. Doug, the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Bruce, and thanks to the Victoria Chamber for sponsoring this this afternoon. My name is Doug Kobayashi. I am a local boy. I was actually born in Nova Scotia, but my father was in the Royal Canadian Navy, and we were within 6 months. I grew up here in Victoria in the 60s and 70s, and left in the mid 70s to go off for an engineering career in the aerospace industry. I am a professional engineer. I've owned 3 small businesses here in Victoria, and I've also had the pleasure and honor of running major corporations in both Canada and the US. I've lived all over actually in Victoria. I've downtown Victoria as a youngster, and then most of my latter in my teen years, and I've lived out here in Colwood and Langford and Machosen. The one thing that you're going to find about me is that I try to think for myself. I sometimes get myself into trouble because I may not necessarily follow a party line, but I certainly use common sense, and I try to fact check all the time. I am a critical thinker. I am running because of climate change. And if there's one legacy that I do want to have is that I made a difference. And I've actually read the Liberal climate change plan. I believe in it because it's pragmatic, it's practical. It's not a light switch that you can turn on and off, and you can't just quit fossil fuels tomorrow. It would be an economic disaster for this country. So what has been presented by the Liberal Party is the reason I decided to run as a candidate for the Liberal Party. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Doug Kobayashi, the candidate for the Liberal Party of Canada. And our 4th candidate is Laura Frost, candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada. Laura, the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Thanks, Bruce, and thank you very much at Chamber of Commerce. I'm Laura Frost, and I'm running as the Conservative candidate. I don't know I really hadn't been planning to, but about 6 months ago, I just felt it deeply in my heart that Canadians have been through a really bad time, and that many of us need to stand up. We need to stand up and bring our skills to the table. And I looked at my life and I thought, well, I've got some pretty good skill sets. So, and I found myself very well aligned with the Conservative Party. So what it is I have a great upbringing with my family. We were sort of an adventure group. My dad was a geologist, and we sailed all up and down the coast here on different trips. But after that, when I got out on my own, I got a bachelor's of science in forestry, then a master's in environmental design, and finally a PhD in geography. And the reason I pursued all those courses, those paths, was because I was interested in interdisciplinary problem solving, environmental and social. So what it takes is in my background, after my research, which much of it was done in Southeast Asia, I then came back to Canada, and I worked in government for a number of years, about 15 years, both in provincial and federal governments. So I'm very familiar with working with First Nations, working with communities, working with towns, looking for the common ground. And I think that I have skill sets to bring to the table, and I'm very excited about this time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. Laura Frost, candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada. Now, we're going to be covering a number of different topics here. As I mentioned off the top, this is a listening session. This is not something that will involve rebuttals or comments back and forth. We just want the candidates to be able to present as much information as they possibly can about their party's position and policy going into this election. So housing, Whether you feel that you're threatened by a housing crisis or not, you are, because our entire economy is right now. You may not think it directly affects you, but it does. So Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation, CMHC, is talking about something called a housing continuum that would be sort of people ranging from homelessness to homeowners in the real estate market, talking about what the entire housing market looks like and what it needs to look like. But we need to have a renewed interest in housing that is affordable for low and middle income workers. Workplace housing in particular has to be a priority. We need to make sure that restaurant workers and teachers and frontline workers have a place to live that's a secure and stable housing situation for them. A couple of our partners in this event today are the Vancouver Island Construction Association and the Urban Development Institute, or UDI for the Capital Region, who point out that construction, which is a big part of rebuilding, literally where we're going to be going, construction employs about 1.4 million workers across this country. That is 7.5% of our GDP. Our debt is soaring all the time. Construction will play a key role in growing our economy going forward. So we're going to talk right now about increasing infrastructure investment around housing. We need to fix some of our aging infrastructure, roads. We've seen things like ventilation in houses and workplaces and hospitals come up in the face of COVID. So we need to set some national goals around building sustainability into our infrastructure that we have in place right now. So we need to connect supply chains, and we need to effectively move goods and services across borders, interprovincial and international. The funds have to be reliable, predictable, they need to be quickly accessible, and need to be aligned with the provincial, the municipal, and Indigenous needs. So the question is to you candidates, to achieve this, will you commit to working to create an independent advisory board that can align governments at the provincial and municipal level to address infrastructure deficits across the country? Laura, I invite you to respond first to this. You've got about a minute and a half. Go ahead, the floor is yours. Oh, you're on mute, Laura, sorry. We all need a t-shirt that says you're on mute for what we've been through in the last while.
Sorry,
there we go.
Technical issue there.
Sure.
I couldn't see you either. So what I'd like to mostly bring out across is that we would support that kind of initiative, certainly. Our primary focus in terms of housing and affordable housing is that Erin O'Toole's plan is to stop foreign ownership in BC for at least 2 years and let the market normalize. Secondly, he also plans to provide a means for first-time homeowners in gaining mortgage support. And finally, but not least, he plans to release 15% of federal lands for affordability projects. And this is where I see really linking into that question that you initiated, Bruce, because, for example, Belmont Park here in Colwood is a large area, which would be a wonderful area for the development of affordable housing. It would be it's right in front of the ocean. It's an accessible community, and it would support thousands of units. And I certainly could see working with provincial governments, working with builders, and trying to develop not just an affordable community, but a community that's sustainable and one on the way forward. So that's the way we're looking to go.
Great, thank you, Laura, very much for that. Doug Kobayashi, about a minute and a half
or so.
The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Bruce. This is exactly how I like to work anyways, collaboratively. And I do understand the importance of having the provincial government, local governments, First Nations, developers. You know, it's like being a CEO, you got to have all your little red buttons there ready to push. And you bring the experts around the table to develop the options and do an analysis and come up with the best solutions. Right now, each party has its own little platform. I'm not going to repeat the Liberal platform because it's well articulated and published. But you know, some of the things that I think are key to this right now is this is a very, very complex problem, and I really understand this right now. If you do one thing, something else gets affected. If you do another thing, something else gets affected. But you know, we've got to put everything on the table, and I think we've done that. With working together, the province and the federal government have done a good job, or doing a good job right now on the non-market housing. They just have to put the social service wraps around it to make it very effective. So I'm very pleased with that. And of course, we have to increase the supply of rentals, maybe even look at ending exclusive zoning in cities, but that's a municipal responsibility. But we can certainly use federal green infrastructure and transportation dollars to maybe get some of the zoning reform. Maybe we even have to look at reforming the tax system to make housing less attractive to investors. Lots of ideas out there, but we also should be looking for the renters, maybe stronger tenant protections and rent controls to keep people in their homes. And the one thing,
Doug, can we wrap it there? We can probably pick this
sure.
up later in the conversation, but I'd like to move along. Thanks very much for that. And Harley, minute and a half, go.
Thanks, Bruce. I will not ask you to repeat the question. It was pretty long, but if I could speak to the core of the issue, which is housing is unaffordable for many Canadians, and it affects far more than just finding a place to live. It affects people's employment opportunities. It affects employers for even having the ability to hire people because they can't find a place to live. So ultimately, this is a huge issue. It affects us all, and it is definitely one that will take the work and the collaboration of all levels of government, the provincial, the federal, the municipal, and First Nations governance. Now, the Green Party platform specifically says they will increase reliable funding for municipalities for infrastructure and housing development. So this is moving away from a grant-based system where the municipalities are competing against each other and dedicating some reliable funding for these important infrastructure developments. Part of the ways that the federal government can really help with housing is actually supporting and working with municipalities. Rather than a top-down approach, baked into the Green Party platform is always about locally led initiatives. We need people on the ground. We are committed to this grassroots notion of change, and change comes from the bottom up. This is what we want to support, and this is what I would support as your MP. A few other sections with the housing is first and foremost innovation. A lot of the ways that we have been building housing in the past they're outdated. And it is a sector ripe for innovation. There are a lot of new materials and a lot of new processes that can be developed. So we would increase funding for research and development, especially in the housing sector, because this can absolutely affect affordability because it can drive down construction costs.
Okay. Harley, we might be able to pick that point up a little later on, but I'll stop you right there for now. Thanks very much for that. And Randall Garrison, the floor is yours for about a minute and a half, please.
Well, thanks very much, Bruce. Yes, of course, I would agree with your proposal that we need something to bring all levels of government together to work on this problem. But I think in the meantime, there's some quick things that can be done to take some of the pressure off the housing market locally. One of those is to promote the building of more rental housing. And we've talked for a long time in the NDP about taking the GST off purpose-built affordable rental housing. And this would provide a big incentive for some more investment in rental housing. Second thing we could do is get CMHC back into the business of financing cooperative and nonprofit housing, something it used to do. And this is a way of providing affordable housing for seniors and families that can't be monetized, can't become part of the speculative economy, but still provides a sense of community and security of tenure to those tenants. And the last thing we can do is we can increase the tax which is placed on speculators. So somebody who owns more than one home and flips it, we can increase the amount of capital gains to be taxed from 50 to 75%. That'll take a lot of the incentive for buying and flipping houses out of the market.
Thank you very much. I mentioned earlier that we have some partners in this whole effort that we're doing here: Vancouver Island Construction Association, Destination Greater Victoria, the Urban Development Institute, and the Greater Victoria Harbour Authority. So the next one here is kind of about a thing that's been around pre-COVID, during COVID, and certainly a situation coming out of COVID, and that is attracting and retaining workers. Workforce has always been a huge issue in this region right now. So construction is not alone in that. Hospitality, technology support, which will be very important going forward. Trades, healthcare. It's very difficult to find bicycle technicians because everybody bought a bike during. So there's all of these things that are workplace shortages right now. So federal funding for this sort of thing. The question to you is this: to fill the gap in the workforce, will you commit to working with industry to recruit and train people who see sectors like construction as a career of choice, especially among those who are underrepresented in the industry? Doug Kobayashi, I'll start with you for about a minute and a half, please.
I absolutely would. I could tell you my own story on this one very quickly, Bruce. It's you know, we obviously, we do need immigration. I am a fan of it for, you know, for those areas where you need to have the skill sets. You know, we could just talk about local doctors right now, but my own story here is that I you know, I was originally, I got my PEng, my professional engineering designation in Ontario. When I moved to Manitoba, I had to go get a new credential. I moved to Alberta, I had to get a new credential. I moved to BC, I had to get a new credential. But I think what we have to do from a federal government point of view is we have to continue to work with the provinces, territories, and the regulatory bodies to improve credential recognition. Never mind, you know, foreign credential recognition, but right across Canada.
Great. Thank you, Doug, very much. Harley, over to you.
So we're addressing the fact that there is a labor shortage in a lot of industries on Southern Vancouver Island, specifically construction. Now, conventional wisdom is the way to deal with the labor shortage is to increase wages and to increase compensation and benefits. This is something that the private sector can do if it is affordable enough. But quite frankly, a lot of the labor shortage derives from the cost of living being too high and employers unable to pay a wage that is sufficient for residents to even buy a house. The Green Party has a lot of great broad and bold platform points to really address this. One of them is a guaranteed livable income. Right now we have a social safety net, and I think a net is a great description because a net is full of holes and people keep falling through the cracks. A guaranteed livable income allows people to move to a new location, to take some of the risks that they may not have been able to take before, and can actually help build the economy. Pilot studies in Ontario have shown it is very beneficial for even increasing the number of new business starts. On top of that, when it comes to training new employees, the Green Party is moving towards universal tuition. Some people call it free tuition. I don't agree. It's not free, obviously, but it takes the burden off a 17-year-old to fund their education and puts it onto the society. And in the end, we all win when we start investing in our youth and investing in education. So it is an investment in new training programs and taking the burden of paying and the burden of debt that many young people are left with when choosing perhaps a new career or a career in the first place, and puts it on our society and our government as a whole.
Great. Thanks, Harley, very much. Randall Garrison, over to you.
Well, the shortage of skilled workers is an important problem to tackle in our society. And I think there's a couple of things we can do. And one of those is try to make sure that those who aren't working, who are outside paid employment, can get the skills they need to fill the actual vacancies in the jobs that exist. And so we don't do a very good job. We say the door's open and why aren't you knocking on it? But maybe people don't have the skills they need to even knock on the door. And so we have to work with those groups who have traditionally had lower completion rates in high school and those who have really moved out of the labor market altogether because it's not made accessible to them. So people with disabilities, for instance, there's lots of things we can do to open up those doors and get people into employment. The other part for our region is childcare. And if we actually had adequate childcare in this region, that would free up a lot of parents who are stuck at home doing the childcare because there are no spaces available or there are no affordable spaces available. And so increasing the supply of spaces and coming in with a $10 a day childcare program, which the Liberals promised at the 11th hour and we've promised to support if we're back in Parliament, would be a good way to get women in particular, because they do most of the childcare, back into the workforce. And if we can offer them trades training, they're sure to take it up.
Thank you, Randall. Laura, over to you for about a minute and a half.
Thank you. I think I'd like to tackle this one in two different areas. Job training to create opportunity would be the first. So Canadian non-for-profit organizations like Build a Dream and Women Building Futures have programs especially designed to encourage women to pursue jobs and in the skilled trades through training and mentorship. Canada's Conservatives will support these initiatives and ensure that women have the training they need to pursue careers in the trades and in other areas of the economy through comprehensive training plan. And the other area is immigration, and particularly Conservatives will launch a credential recognition task force to help remove barriers to skilled professionals that we need, particularly in the building trades. So At the same time, an O'Toole government will stand up for fundamental human rights and align itself with the hopes and aspirations of people wherever they are. So basically, there are people they want in. We need to get them the training they need, and Erin O'Toole's Conservatives is right on top of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. We're going to loop back on a couple of things that you have all mentioned, childcare and immigration, in just a couple of minutes. I want to come back to the housing thing for just a second. You know, the jurisdiction in which you're all pursuing to serve, which is Colwood, Langford, View Royal, Sooke, Saanich, housing has been booming. There's been a lot going on in those regions to provide workplace housing. However, the federal funding for that stuff is great, but delivering the supply is another challenge due to the municipal role. We have quite a few municipalities here, and Mr. Garrison, Mr. Kobayashi, you've both served on councils. You know what goes on at that level. What can the federal government, and one that you would be a part of, what would your government do to encourage local governments to increase housing supply? And Randall Garrison, I'll start with you.
Well, again, I think part of that is to get CMHC back in the provision of what we sometimes call social housing, nonprofit and cooperative housing, and then to work with the municipalities to find places in the community to actually build those projects. And in my case, I was on the Esquimalt Council. Esquimalt actually owns a lot of land that the council could make available for those kinds of very important community initiatives in terms of affordable housing, but nobody actually puts those two things together. And so again, if CMHC were really back involved in this, and we had the kind of committee you've been talking about, Bruce, to coordinate things, there's a lot of space within municipalities like Esquimalt that could be used for affordable housing.
Great, thank you. Laura, over to you.
I guess the most important thing, I'm sorry, I'm blanking here. Would you repeat the question? Just the end part of it.
Yeah, for sure. What can the federal government do to encourage local governments to increase housing supplies? So it's cutting through red tape.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about it, but it's primarily a provincial issue, and that's the baseline. But I really like the Conservatives' take on bringing in the reserve land, federal reserve land, and making it 15% open, because that's what we can do. That's what we can do. Here's a land base in good spots, and then that's what we are doing. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Harley.
Municipal zoning and how the federal government can help. This is an incredibly important issue, because a lot of these decisions are made at the council level, and it comes to zoning, and especially when we have cities where 85% of the land base is single family homes, right? A lot of that is not utilized space, or not effectively utilized space. So there's a few things. First, I think we need to recognize that just building houses is fine, but remember, houses come with infrastructure. They come with sewage, they come with water, they come with large scale infrastructure costs. And sometimes we put them on the back of developers, which again raises the cost. This is something that I iterated in one of the earlier questions, was where we talked about reliable funding for infrastructure development for cities. So we can ensure that people who live in these houses that are getting built have reliable transportation. They have active transportation methods as well, where we have new bridges, like the new bridge that will hopefully get built over the Galapagos in Colwood. Now, when it comes to what we can do at the municipal for just housing, working with municipalities to ensure that public transit infrastructure development or public transit investment is effectively utilized by encouraging municipalities to increase density along transit corridors and hubs. Right? This is something that it's at a municipal level, but it plays out in almost every municipality across the country, right? We're not always effectively utilizing the space. And I think we do need a very good national strategy when it comes to addressing the housing shortage and the housing affordability crisis on a national level, but it will take solutions at the municipal council level. And that's where the federal government can come in with infrastructure funding, and it can come in with development funding as well.
Great, thanks, Harley. Doug Kobayashi.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Well, I just want to make something is clear here. Under the Constitution, in actual fact, the land use is under the jurisdiction of local governments. So I just want to clarify that before I start here. But I think, again, as I said earlier, I believe that using federal green infrastructure and transportation dollars right now, I think we need to achieve some zoning reform here within the municipalities. It's a leverageable tool right now. We definitely have to, I believe we definitely have to densify along, especially along major transit corridors. The second thing that I think that has to happen somehow is, and I don't know how to leverage this right now, but we obviously have to, we can help developers, and the developers will produce more for us if we can actually decrease the development timelines right now. They're just absolutely gross. They vary from 2 years in one municipality to 30 days in another municipality. So we got to do a better job there. So I think those are the two big things that we can do from the federal government point of view.
Great, thanks, Doug. I want to move over to talk about immigration. This chamber has been talking for a long time about the fact that immigration is the major source of employment in this country, in this region, in this jurisdiction. We have been without immigration, of course, since the onset of COVID in March of 2020. Workforce right now, it's very visible that the shortfalls are happening in hospitality in particular, but in trades, as we mentioned before, in tech support. Student employment hasn't been here either to help shore up the locations where those jobs would normally be filled. But I want to talk about immigration. Something that we have spoken about actually was raised earlier. That is the recognition of credentials when people are brought in federally by the immigration ministry, but the recognition of those credentials is provincial. That doesn't align right there. But just to begin this conversation, let me ask you, can you confirm that you will work to ensure that Canada returns to having robust immigration, which is needed to grow our economy? Will you support that going forward if elected? And Harley, I'll start with you.
Yes, and just, you had said immigration is the major source of employment?
A major source of employment for this region, correct?
Okay, right. Now that's actually part of the Green Party platform, is having a system to recognize the credentials from immigrants brought to this country, especially under the federal jurisdiction, where you have different regulations provincially, but making sure that it's streamlined and accessible and understandable, right? There's several levels of government, and making sure that we have perhaps one approach would be far more effective for the immigrants. We also want to make sure that temporary foreign workers who do an outsized amount of labor, especially in the agricultural sector, are recognized and protected and supported. There are a lot of issues when it comes to housing and protection for temporary foreign workers, and it's really important that the federal government take a role in ensuring that they are protected, welcomed, and their role is understood. So I think that's another part of immigration that we need to focus on.
Great, thank you very much for that. Randall Garrison.
Well, obviously, the NDP does support returning to previous immigration levels and trying to deal with the backlogs that exist in applications. And whether that's with family reunification, where we are actually forcing families to be apart for years before they can reunite in Canada, or that we're talking about applications for skilled workers that businesses actually need. And again, we're taking months and months and months to process those applications. So we have to apply the resources at the federal government level to clear those backlogs right away. When it comes to temporary foreign workers, I'm going to go even a bit farther than Harley and say that what's really, really important here is to grant status for all, so that if you've actually worked in Canada for a certain period of time, that you can stay in Canada. We've always said, if you're good enough to work here, you're good enough to stay here. When we talk about immigration, again, we also need to think about refugees. And we have a terrible refugee crisis around the world, and Canada can do more to take in refugees who are most often very skilled workers, very high levels of education, because they're the ones who've been able to get out of their countries successfully. So we would certainly support increased immigration.
Great, thank you very much. Doug, Kobayashi.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's not only that the provinces you have to contend with, even a larger, more powerful body within each provinces are the regulatory bodies, right? CMA and the surgeons and the professional engineering organizations. That's a big part of it. They have to be at the table. But I know right now that there's a few commitments that the Liberal government is that they will reform the economic immigration programs to expand pathways to permanent residence for temporary foreign workers and foreign international students through the express entry point system. There will establish a trusted employer system to streamline application for Canadian companies hiring temporary foreign workers to fill the labor shortages that cannot be filled by Canadian workers. And lastly, they're committed to grow and improve the global talent stream program by simplifying the permit renewals and upholding the 2-week processing time and establishing an employee hotline to allow Canadian companies to attract and hire highly skilled workers. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug, very much. Laura Frost, over to you.
Yeah. The Conservative position is that those who wish to come to Canada deserve a plan that provides clarity and a process that treats them with dignity, compassion, and respect, helping newcomers maximize their success by allowing them to work in the field of knowledge and expertise is good for Canada and for our economy, and it's good for Saanich. It's good for Sooke, and it's good for Esquimalt. Conservatives will launch a credential recognition task force. This is a promise to help remove barriers for skilled professionals that we need, from engineers, to doctors, coders, to plumbers, to the tech industry. And what's more, agricultural workers and service industry. We definitely need them all. So an O'Toole government will stand up for fundamental human rights and align itself with the hopes and aspirations of everyday people wherever they live. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The other part of this too is that when we take a look at, again, bringing people into Canada, bringing new Canadians over with their skills, they tend very often to settle in larger urban areas because that is perceived to be the area where there's more opportunity. You know, we as an island economy don't align with a lot of the rest of Canada. We don't have a manufacturing-based economy. We don't do a lot of that sort of thing that's sort of the backbone of everything else that happens in this country. But what can we do? What would you do to ensure that newcomers still see Greater Victoria as a target destination for them, not just the big cities across the country? Laura, you finished the last one. Why don't you start this one?
Well, I think that basically you pick those sectors that you want to move. So right now, the tech sector is a big sector, and it really doesn't matter where in the world you're coming from. If you know the software, if you're ahead in the tech, come, we can use you. Other sectors, well, we have forestry. Forestry's always been one. And I would say that actually in the history, so many immigrants came to this country and ended up in small communities across the province or across Canada because they were working in forestry. So it really depends on who's needing the workers and the pools we're pulling into. But I think if you identify, we've got a housing boom, we need builders, then that's where we'll pull from. So that's my take on it. Thanks.
Thank you. Doug Kobayashi.
Could you repeat the question, Bruce?
Yeah, how do we make sure that we can attract these much valued workers into our region as a smaller geographic region? Major cities, it's Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, Montreal, tend to be the destination point for a lot of these folks, but we need to make sure that we can also attract them into smaller regions like ours. How can the government act to make that happen?
Targeted recruiting. I can tell you right now, having worked with so many high-tech companies over the last couple of years here right now, and they're actually using immigrant, foreign countries right now, their workers, and everything is through Zoom. You know, we've become very digital here, and so it's targeted. And I know a lot of them that would love to move to this area, but it's just not a free for all. It's actually targeted recruiting. So I think that's important aspect of that. And it's just good old fashioned. Putting up the welcoming mat. It's the story of a very similar story that I heard from one of my doctors who was talking about when an immigrant came over from South Africa, a doctor and his wife, and they moved up into this remote area in northern Alberta. And he was happy because he got to go and he got to socialize with people at work. But then his poor wife was isolated. And the first opportunity, they went back to South Africa. So it's that kind of story. It's simple. It's a simple program, actually.
Great. Thank you, Doug, very much. Harley.
Now, with the major cities in Canada being an attractive destination for a lot of new workers is of course, they have larger economies and a more diversified economy. Greater Victoria, I wouldn't consider it a small city, especially by Canadian standards. But the economy is less diversified than a place like Calgary, Montreal, and we have to recognize that a lot of the regions in Canada, the smaller to mid-sized cities, are based off previous resource extraction economies, some that are being phased out to a certain extent or reduced. We are in a transitionary period right now where we are working to decarbonize the economy, where we are working to a more sustainable future. And part of that means changing some of the resource extraction and manufacturing processes that we've had in the past. So the Green Party plans to invest heavily in new enterprise. Part of that is through actually changing the venture capital culture in Canada and creating a green fund, a $1 billion fund for more clean tech innovation. We have a great opportunity, even within the shipyards in our riding, where we still have electrified ferries getting shipped in from Poland and from Europe, because there needs to be upfront investment into the greening and manufacturing sector within our economy. We have a lot of very skilled workers here, and we can definitely have more as we transition to a more sustainable economy, and we grow things like the tech sector, which is very healthy in Victoria and which will continue to grow. I just saw that recently Langford had a great is moving a headquarters, and Amazon, I think, is building a distribution area by the airport. So there is a lot of growth and opportunity in our community in Greater Victoria, and with a green government and with more federal investment into transitioning our manufacturing sector and growing our clean tech innovation, I think we can move forward and have a very strong future.
Great. Thank you, Harley. Randall Garrison.
Well, about 30 years ago, I was the founding president of the Victoria Immigrant and Refugees Center. And one of the constants as a barrier for new immigrants and refugees settling in Victoria is the cost of housing and the lack of availability of rental housing. So these issues we've been talking about are interrelated. And the more we can do to provide a supply of affordable rental housing, the more attractive this community will be. And the second thing, of course, something we've already talked about, the family reunification program is one of the most important for attracting new immigrants to our community. Because as people reunite their families here, they bring additional extended family members, because family definitions are a lot broader in some places than ours. And they also bring their friends along with them to apply. And then finally, the temporary foreign workers. If you can get status in Canada by coming here and putting in a period of work, then that will be very important to attracting additional temporary foreign workers. And temporary foreign workers tend to work in what's called chain migration. They tend to let others know about their opportunities, and again, bring their family and friends along. So when we solve those problems of status for all in terms of temporary foreign workers, we solve the housing problems, then we won't have such a big problem selling Victoria as a destination.
Great, thank you. Another potential on the workforce side is connected to the economic reconciliation that we face with First Nations. This chamber on Canada Day, in fact, made a statement of acknowledgement that chambers and other organizations like us have been a part of the systemic suppression of Indigenous economy and culture. The same with systemic racism that was around, everything from the Chinese head tax to other things historically, history of misogyny, all the rest of it. So we need to find a way now to start reconciliation with the First Nations so that they can undertake self-directed business initiatives on their own. All of the stuff about, the tragedy of residential schools, everything associated with the Indian Act historically has been suppressive of their economy and of their ability to succeed. So September 30th is upcoming. How would your government, how would you as an individual commit to working with First Nation and Indigenous entrepreneurs to help them, if nothing else, access the financing that has not been available due to the limitations of the Indian Act, which has such a broad range of issues that challenge their growth and their development. But let's talk in terms of that going forward. And Randall Garrison, I'll start with you.
Well, I think first we have to acknowledge that quite often First Nations people organize their economic enterprises differently than we do. And there's a lot more emphasis on cooperative and community-based enterprise. And so entrepreneurs aren't necessarily individual entrepreneurs, but there's some very active entrepreneurs working on behalf of their communities. A second thing, I guess I am going to reflect on what some others have said here. In this problem, the federal government, the provincial government and First Nations have agreed that any surplus land that's ever released will go to the land claim settlement process here to provide a land base for those First Nations entrepreneurs to work on. And I'm sorry to hear if anybody wants to go back on that promise, because it's an important way to provide opportunity to First Nations to use those lands for housing and other economic development activities.
Thank you very much. Harley.
Thank you. This is very important, and it is really important for us to reconcile with the past history of Canada and a lot of its institutions and the systemic racism that has been baked into them by design. This is something that we are all moving ahead with, and we through the recognition of systemic racism, through understanding the difficulties that we've gone through as a past, it's really important to also take an eye to the future and see what it can look like. Throughout the whole Green Party platform, there's one focus with Indigenous issues, and that is Indigenous led. There are 630 different nations across Canada, and to think that there is a one-size-fits-all solution for everyone is just not factual. We are the second largest country in the world. There are incredibly diverse cultures across our whole nation. So importantly, moving forward and supporting entrepreneurship within Indigenous communities, it has to be Indigenous led. Part of that is through stable funding. This is something that we will support with municipalities, and it's something that the Green Party will support within First Nations communities. Stable funding for healing centers, stable funding for investment, stable funding for infrastructure, moving away from such a grants-based approach. This is about empowering people and supporting them in their own decisions in their own life. So it's a bottoms-up approach. It's grassroots, and it is not top-down. It's not Ottawa-led. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Harley. Laura Frost.
I'd just like to start with explaining Erin O'Toole's Conservative Party will honor all recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Panel, specifically urging all levels of government, federal, provincial, territorial, and Aboriginal, to work together to change policies and programs in a concerted effort to repair the harm done by residential schools and move forward. On a personal level, I have considerable experience working with First Nations, particularly in Northern Alberta. I see the initiatives they want to put forward. I work in a Lesser Slave Lake, has 7 First Nations around it, 2 towns and 2 municipalities. And each and every one of those groups has their eye on tourism, and they have their eye on recreation, and they have their eye on the Crown land. But in the end, we all have to come to something that works together. So we're talking partnership, we're talking visioning, because if we have that, what happens is we can move forward with release of Crown lands and that type of thing. So this is what Erin O'Toole's proposing, is to listen, look for the partnership opportunities, and certainly there's money to come. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Laura. Final word on this goes to Doug Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I absolutely agree with everything that the 3 people before me have stated. I have no issues with anything they've said, but I also believe that we have to launch an Indigenous housing strategy. We have to confront the legacy of the residential schools and take action to address racism, especially in healthcare and the justice system. But, saying all this, I would like to also add that something that's very important is that we have to give the Indigenous people the time and space to have input to the ideas and solutions, and not us imposing, those solutions to them and our timelines. And, we got into arguments earlier that we haven't, government hasn't done this, government hasn't done that, but, there's that extra player that's always in this, and that is our Indigenous people. And they have to work to their timelines and to their solutions. They're part of the management and part of the solution to everything. So Thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug. And just to wrap up, as I had mentioned that we did that statement of acknowledgement, this chamber has also created an economic Indigenous recovery task force, which we will be assembling for the purpose of finding out what aspirations are in place and how we can help Indigenous business achieve those goals by connection with non-Indigenous businesses. We've also established something called the Committee for the Advancement of Diversity and Inclusion, which will be a very active way of recruiting diversity within the business community to connect with each other. Let's talk about climate before we wrap it up here. Of course, it's the most pressing issue of our generation. This chamber has been saying all the way along that environmentally and planet-wise, yes, it's a priority, but the economic side of greening our economy has to be a huge priority too. For that to be effective change, it's government that can create the guidelines and the goals, but that has to be achieved by industry and business taking those goals and guidelines forward. So how would you and your government work to ensure that government invests in solutions that are already being driven by business in response to public demand? Doug, we'll go back and start with you because we finished with you last time. Doug Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Bruce. As I stated in my introductory remarks, I really urge people to have a read of the federal Liberal climate change plan. It's a great 64-point plan that is inclusive. It builds on the work that's been done to date, and the plan also commits to develop Canada's first ever national adaptation strategy. And I think this is all important right now that we've got a starting place right now. What we need is the action plans to go with it, the accountability. I'd personally like to, so we stop this arguing and bickering all the time politically. I would love to see a dashboard, of how we're going to, measure this, because there are going to, I'm not saying this is the perfect plan, because I'm sure that there's things that we didn't think of, but we do have to have those mid-course changes. And the only way you do that is by measuring it. So we do need to have that dashboard and make it public. Like I would love to see this right in our own riding. So, how can we affect it, as people that live within this riding? I also want to point out that this plan itself was inclusive in the fact that we're the first country in the world to have our own Indigenous people have their own annex on the climate plan. And I'd finally like to say on this is that this plan, it does go across party lines because it has been endorsed by Dr. Andrew Weaver, the former leader of the Green Party of BC. And it's also been endorsed by former NDP leader Tom Mulcair. So I believe this is a great starting place right now. And now it's execution. And this is what I think this election is about, is about choosing if we're going to go forward with this or if we're going to go with a different plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Randall Garrison, over to you.
Well, thanks, Bruce. I know I'm like a lot of people who are really tired of talking about targets that we never meet. And so in the last parliament, I introduced a motion called M50. And that motion calls for the immediate end to all subsidies to fossil fuel projects. That would do things like kill the TMX pipeline, which presents a threat to our local waters and our tourism industry and our sport fishing industry. And then the motion says, take that money and put it in a Crown corporation that will start building renewable energy projects in every community across the country. And those kind of projects would provide a real boost to our local economy because they'll take all kinds of supplies from local suppliers. They'll have a real multiplier effect in our local economy. And so the motion also says that we need to actually give a priority to those new jobs in areas like Northern BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland, where families face big job losses in the traditional energy industry, because we're not going to get to the goals we need unless we have enough social solidarity. And that means we can't ask workers to pay for this necessary transition with their jobs and their houses. Thanks.
Thanks, Randall. Harley.
If I can just reframe the question a little bit when we talked about the cost of dealing with the climate crisis. I think we need to consider the cost of not dealing with it, the consequences of not taking investments into decarbonizing the economy. And to answer this question, I want to break it into two parts. First is mitigation. We have already raised the average temperature on Earth by 1.5 degrees. It doesn't sound like a lot. But that means right here on Vancouver Island, our snowpack melts 1 month earlier than it did in the 1980s. So that affects our watersheds, that affects our reservoirs, that affects our salmon habitat. It affects far more than we realize because it's up away in the mountains sometimes. So there is a climate change that has already occurred, and there are disasters that are occurring. We saw it this summer with a heat dome that killed hundreds of Canadians and hundreds of British Columbians just in our province. We see it on the East Coast where there's record-breaking hurricanes. We see it in Europe where there's floods that are catastrophic. The climate crisis is here, and we need to focus not just on solutions, but also on mitigation and adaptation. When it comes to solutions, we are in a transitionary period, and I did talk about this with decarbonizing our economy. This means that we need to focus on a just transition for workers and ensuring that all workers working in the higher polluting industries have their employment opportunities replaced by high-paying jobs in the renewable energy sector. Canada is making some progress in this, but we need to make more if we want to meet our climate targets and ultimately achieve this goal that everyone's starting to talk about, that is net zero emissions across our country by 2050. And when you say it's the problem of our generation, it's the problem of my generation as well, right? 2050 is not that long away. I will only be 58 years old. I will be working in the net zero economy. So it affects me personally.
Okay, Harley, let's wrap it there if we could, please. Thanks very much. And Laura.
Thank you, Bruce. Conservatives have a serious plan to combat climate change that allows us to meet our targets and reduce emissions by 2030, and which will result in a boost of jobs and the economy. Still, Canada will need to adapt and build on resiliency. At the local level of Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke, this means that we must prepare for more frequent and likely longer summer droughts than we've had 2 of them in the last decade. The loss of 570 people to heat stroke is simply not acceptable. Having enough reservoir water in drought years and increasing the number of homes and community centers with air conditioning so that people have sheltering stations in a heat wave needs to be a priority. If elected, I'll work hard to ensure that a priority for federal infrastructure investments will be a substantially increase the Greater Victoria freshwater reservoir capacity to see us through such events. I will also advocate for federal heat pump rebate programs to increase accessible air-conditioned units through the region. A conservative federal government will help build resiliency in Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you all for being here. We're going to move in now to the closing remarks on the day, again, about 1.5 minutes. And as I mentioned, we're going to do this in reverse order of when we introduced you at the top. So for closing remarks, we will go first to Laura Frost, candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada. Laura.
There's a couple of new programs that the Conservatives have. And one is for, it has to do with families, and it has to do with moms that just had babies. So what the Conservative government wants to do is expand the length of EI considerably for women that have just given birth. And they'd also like to make available more access, especially single moms, more access to diapers and bottles and clothing and everything that they need. Secondly, we've also we have a much more robust childcare system that we're bringing into place. And finally, we're also looking to increase the number of EI days for women that lose an infant. So I just really wanted to bring these issues up as well. The Conservative government cares about families, and these are important times. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Laura Frost, Conservative candidate for this riding. Doug Kobayashi is the Liberal Party candidate. Doug, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. And again, thank you very much for hosting this afternoon, Bruce. And to my fellow candidates, like I said before, I always learn something new. And I would like to say that we certainly have quite a few very important issues that we're facing: climate change, housing affordability, are still our ongoing battle of COVID-19, which is still happening right now, our healthcare, just a myriad of issues. But what I really enjoyed about all these sessions so far is that, very intelligent, astute, articulate people around the table. And I would like to hopefully get to work with you in the future, maybe, in different capacities, because, there's some really good things that have been said. So I've enjoyed it from that point of view. And it's just my approach. It's a collaborative approach. I don't care what color flag you fly. We don't care when we're working around the volunteer tables. We don't care when we're working around the corporate tables. We just need the solutions and getting on with the action. So I just want to close out again by saying thank you very much for the afternoon.
Thank you, Doug, very much. Doug Kobayashi, Liberal Party of Canada. Harley Gordon, Green Party of Canada. Over to you.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks to everyone for joining. I think this may be our last all candidates of the election, and it has been interesting discussing with everyone. So I'm sure we'll chat over in Colwood, Doug, in the future. But to drive into the election, I do want everyone to consider before voting. I want them to ask a question to themselves that is the way you voted in the past. Are your representatives, is your government, is our government working for your best interest, and have they achieved solutions? Is housing more affordable? Is the climate crisis being dealt with? When you ask these questions, the answer is all too often no. That's why the moment is now for bold and progressive policies like a guaranteed livable income, like pharmacare, like dental care, like universal childcare. The time is now. We are in a transition, and we can achieve these goals. I'm running with a long-term vision. I'm running with a vision for 50 years into the future, because I believe that together we really can accomplish something that makes Canada a better place, not just for us, but for our children and for our children's children. I'm working towards long-term solutions to these major issues we face. And with that, I believe that all together we can build a future to look forward to. Thanks.
Thanks, Harley Gordon, candidate for the Green Party of Canada, and Randall Garrison, candidate for the Federal New Democratic Party.
Well, thanks, Bruce, for your able moderating today, and to all my fellow candidates for all the time we've spent together during this campaign. Today, we find ourselves closing on an election day in the midst of the fourth wave of the pandemic in an unnecessary election. When this parliament ended early, I was left close to the finish line, not just on the renewable energy motion I mentioned, but on several other personal projects. I've been working to get the Canadian forces to respond better to mental health challenges, and in particular to recognize that not all injuries are visible, but they're injuries all the same. Those recommendations died in draft form in committee. When the pandemic brought a spike in domestic violence, I wrote a bill to give us a new tool to respond earlier by making coercive and controlling violence in intimate partner relationships a criminal offense. I got as far as the unanimous Justice Committee report just before we adjourned. And of course, I was heartbroken to see the bill to ban conversion therapy die in the Senate when the election was called. So today I'm asking for your support to go back to Parliament to continue fighting for you, and in particular for those in the tourism and the arts sectors where recovery from this pandemic is still a long ways off. What I offer you is my record of getting things done and a commitment to continuing to work hard for the people of Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke and Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Randall. And there are your candidates, and that is your session for today, the listening session for the candidates in the Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke riding. Laura Frost, candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada, Doug Kobayashi from the Liberal Party of Canada, Harley Gordon, the Green Party of Canada, and Randall Garrison from the New Democratic Party. Not only thank you for being here, but when these sessions always wrap up, I always want to thank each of you for stepping up to be a candidate. This is not an easy gig. This is not always all that much fun. It's not for the faint of heart. You can't please all the people, and they'll let you know that. So for that and what you're doing, we very much appreciate your dedication and your concern and your concern for our democracy. So thank you for your candidacy. All the best to all of you, and we look forward to seeing the results from next Monday's election. In the meantime, stay well, stay healthy, and thank you again. See you next time.
Thanks, Bruce.